Well, it is 7 o'clock now, and since everyone is here, I'm going to go ahead and call a special meeting of the board of the Chandler Unified School District to order. Mrs. Nye, could you please do our roll call?
Barb Marsden.
Here.
Jason Olive.
Here.
Laura Bruner.
Here.
Lindsay Love.
Here.
Joel Worth.
Here.
Thank you, Mrs. Nye. I am now going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Narducci to talk to us about the mitigation strategies.
Madam President, members of the board, I would like to offer an apology, a sincere apology to our parents, students, and staff. CUSD, like other public school districts, have been in a catch-all to navigate mandates, requirements, and recommendations from various levels of agency and government. We do understand the frustration this causes our families and their ability to navigate systems. We feel this too. None of us want to be in this situation, but we are. We have received over 1,000 community emails in the last few days. Almost overwhelming at times, but the information that we're getting leads us to believe that the fact in whichever way the governing board decides as we move forward, a segment of our community will not agree. In addition, we need to keep in mind outside of what families are doing in their homes and what schools are required or expected to do for mitigation against COVID or other variants. Mitigation in our community remains minimal. With that said, our students and staff perform best when schools are open, and they thrive from all aspects of in-person learning. We learn that, we know that, we see that, and I hear that in schools every day. Before we begin your discussions, our staff would like to share information that may assist in your development of your discussions this evening. Dr. Craig Gilbert will view district data. Dr. Nance will review staff survey responses, and Ms. Lanaberry will review budget implications. And we'll first start with Dr. Gilbert, who will review for the board our district data. Dr. Gilbert?
Yes. Madam President, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to share some information with you. I really want to talk about the components of our CUSD COVID-19 dashboard. Just to clarify, make sure you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
And you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you, Dr. Gilbert.
Sorry, I didn't want to get too far in and then that didn't happen. So just really wanted to make sure that we kind of get an idea of where we are today based on the data from the district, but also as a reminder of what our dashboard is telling us. It is on our CUSD website under opening schools to be able to see the dashboard and the components of our dashboard. Our dashboard is updated every day usually by 10 o'clock. And that is the data that is coming from our schools as our health department works tirelessly with our administrative teams at every school in order to make sure that information is as accurate as we could possibly get it from the information that we receive. So when we look at the dashboard, we talk about confirmed active cases. With confirmed active cases, it's important to know that students or staff members participating in on-campus activities who has tested positive for an active COVID infection is considered an active case on campus. You have your percentage of active cases, which is the number of active cases at a school site as a percentage of the total number of staff and students at that campus. So real important to understand, it's not just students, it's students and staff on campus. Then your resolved cases is once the individual is cleared to return to the campus, they are no longer considered an active case, and their case is removed from the confirmed active case count and added to the resolved cases. So with that said, I want to switch to one more screen here, which is our dashboard. And so this dashboard was pulled today. So in understanding and looking at, you'll see that the CUSD staff and students is 49,033, and the current active cases on our campuses total 157 in the district. When you read the dashboard, starting from left to right, you'll see we have secondary schools, and that will be your first column that gives you all of your secondary schools to know when you're looking for your school where to start. You'll see staff and student counts, confirmed active cases. Next is percent of active cases, and then resolved cases. And when you look to the moving to the right of the screen, you'll see the column for your elementary schools. So if you go to the website and you pull up the dashboard, this is what it will give you so that you can look at it. And if you see at 10 o'clock each day, it will give you an updated number based on the number of cases that may be new, as well as cases that move from the confirmed active cases to the resolved cases on the dashboard. So when we want to look at and understand how to read this, let's start with, for example, Anderson Junior High. You'll see Anderson Junior High has 911 students and staff on campus. Their confirmed active cases current is 10, which puts them at a 1.09% of their population, and their resolved cases is 10. Important to note, we know that our thresholds for high school to move into the increased cases column is 1%, our junior high is 1.5%, and our elementary is 2%. With that said, you'll see that, again, Anderson is at 1.09%, which is under the 1.5%, and then you'll see that they have 10 resolved cases. We could also look at, and this has been part of our conversation, and that is going down to Hamilton. Hamilton having a staff and student population of 4,211. They currently have 16 active cases, which you can see it has been trending down from the high cases that put them in the threshold. They are currently at 0.37%, and you'll see that a number of cases have moved to their resolved cases at 115. It's important to note that although Hamilton was over the threshold, they have to be at 10 consecutive days under the threshold to move out of the increased column. So also, I would like to at least share a couple of elementaries. If we look at Carlson Elementary at 719 total students and staff, they have one active case currently on campus. They're at 0.13%, and they have 7 resolved cases. And then finally, one last school I will go down to, and you'll see there's, of course, we have quite a number of schools. You'll see Weinberg Gifted Academy has a population of staff and students of 531. They have 4 active cases, which puts them at a 0.75%, understanding that the elementary threshold is 2%, with 3 resolved cases on their chart. When you look at the number of active cases, because there's been some questions, this data is there for our parents to see, our community to see. If you look at the number of students in the secondary, and let me scroll back up to the top here one moment. And we talked about the COSD staff and students are 49,000. For the secondary, which is our junior high and high school, that population is 26,286, where the elementary population is 22,747, and that's how you would split between the two. So when you look at the confirmed active cases and total that with the resolved cases, you're looking at about, at the secondary level, 1.5% of the total population in secondary had a positive case. And where in elementary, it's 1% of the total elementary population that had 1%. Now, I think it's important to note that the data that we have is collected by students coming in or parents letting us know that their student was positive, or were notified by the county that the student was positive. And that's the data we have. And that's the same data the county has to use, because if you have someone taking a test outside of school, we wouldn't know it unless, and if it was a home test, we wouldn't know it unless they reported it. So if it's reported to us and it's reported to county, that's the information that we use. So that's how you would read and look at the data that you would find on our dashboard. And then under the active and resolved cases, you have the non-campus COVID-19 cases. This was put in place last year as we had parents wanting, and they were hearing of students who maybe had a positive case, but they weren't on our campus. So a cumulative non-campus case listed below are persons either attending or working on campus that have tested positive, but were not on campus during their infection period. So that information is also on here that you can see by each campus. So for example, if you look at, sorry for the quick scroll, I apologize. If you look at Anderson Junior High, they had 4 cases that were non-campus cases. So a parent could have called, or someone may have called to say that their student was positive. That student was never on campus during that time frame, and so they wouldn't be counted as active and resolved cases because they were never on campus. With that said, I just wanted to make sure that I reiterated what our dashboard looks like, and to help parents and families be able to navigate this dashboard from that perspective. And that's the information that I have for you.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Next up, we did put out a survey to our staff. We have over 5,000 staff members. Dr. Nance is going to go through that survey with you. It was a quick turnaround time. I want to thank her and the department for getting that, and for our assessment team for helping put that together. As with having over 5,000 support staff and teaching staff, we wanted to get everybody's input. And so Wendy's going to tell you a little bit more about that. Dr. Nance?
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. CUSD administered a survey to all employees. It was offered in English and Spanish. The survey window opened this week, and it will extend through next Wednesday, August 25th. But we wanted to bring you that data that we have available at this time. We don't have visuals for you, so I am going to read them because we pulled them as of 3 o'clock this afternoon so that we could have the most relevant data to provide you tonight. Currently, CUSD has 5,201 employees. 3,709 surveys have been completed already. That's a return rate of over 71%. So we were very excited, and that happened in the first 28 hours of the survey. Of those returned, we had 33% were our support staff, and that was over 1,200 employees. 55% fall in the teacher category, which was just a little over 2,000 employees. And 8% are professional certificated staff. So that would be our counselors, social workers, psychologists, people who have certificates but not in the classroom. That was at 281. And 4% were our administrators, with just over 150. Out of the surveys returned, 94% are returning employees, so they were with us last year, and 6% are new hires for this current school year. So while we intend to address the survey, and we are preparing to offer back to our employees our frequently asked questions on many of their comments and concerns, so we can answer clearly on the specifics, we are going to provide a brief overview for you of the information that was relevant on the survey to COVID mitigation strategies. So one of the questions asked was, I'm satisfied with the district's response to COVID-19. We had 51% either agreed or strongly agreed with that. We had 11% that shared no opinion either way, and 38% disagreed with the district's response or strongly disagreed. The next question was, I'm satisfied with the communication released by the district regarding the response to COVID-19. 55% agreed or strongly agreed. 13% had no opinion related to communication, and 32% disagreed or strongly disagreed. Then we asked the employees if they felt they had a safe channel within USD to share concerns related to COVID-19. 55% agreed or strongly agreed, 21% had no opinion, and 34% disagreed or strongly disagreed. We did ask the question if an employee would be in favor of a temporary mask mandate that would go into effect only until September 29th. 58% said yes, 42% said no. This mirrors a lot of what we're hearing from our community and families as well. The following, we also asked them open-ended questions because we wanted to allow them to have the freedom to express their concerns or challenges or even necessary supports that they feel would be helpful. So we've used an algorithm to pull out the themes for you tonight with the highest similarities, and we'll be taking the detailed information back to any action items that need addressed at the district level or site level, as well as, again, following up with our employees as a whole on the results. So when we asked our employees to name their top concerns, these are the following areas that came out with the highest number of comments. Again, these were open-ended, so we were pulling them from the answers that were shared. There's masking. Within the masking, the comments related both ways. We had ones requesting to mandate masks and some requesting no masking policy. Concerns were shared related to online teaching or closing schools. And within the comments, many of these included a fear of job loss from our support staff, worry about trying to do online and in-person instruction at the same time, and overall shutting down. Quarantine was another theme in the concerns. This related to both absences of students from instruction and trying to overcome the learning gaps for our students, or wanting more students quarantined or stricter quarantine measures. COVID had a large number of comments. Within that theme, we had the fear of staff and students becoming ill, or staff or students coming to school with symptoms and not staying home. The desire for more clarity on the COVID dashboard and explanation for understanding, and the use of personal leave to cover any COVID quarantines or illness that may occur, and an overall that COVID in general has become a distraction to instruction in the classroom. We had staffing as another theme in this area. This had to do with some of the comments related to vacant support staff positions at this time, including para, neonate, custodians, crossing guard, transportation, and security. Vaccinations was mentioned. Again, both opposite polarizing view here of just comments. One's wanting mandated vaccines and one worried about vaccines being mandated. And I did just want to note that vaccinations legally cannot be mandated at this time, and there is no future proposal to do that. Community spread. The focus was a concern from our staff that schools shouldn't be the only focus as the community as a whole contributes to the spread of the virus. And then the last one in this area is social distancing. This related to classroom sizes, the physical size of classrooms, student class size, the number of students, and the inability now with social distancing that the use of small group instruction or bringing students in a closer environment with each other, they're unable to do and are limited to do at this time. The next area we asked staff was please share some of the most pressing challenges relating to their own position. We had inadequate staffing. This was again referring to those vacancies of support staff, and then also substitutes available for the classroom so that people don't have to cover on their prep periods. Social distancing, again, relating to that classroom space and class size. Cleaning, this was mentioned related to just maintaining the mitigation strategies consistently throughout the day. And then absences, both on the student side where students are out through illness or quarantine, or the sub coverage for the teaching staff if they're out. And our last area we're sharing with you tonight is support needed. We requested for their site or department in order to meet the needs of CUSD facilities, families, students, and staff, what support would be of assistance to them. The first area was to complete staffing. So with the inadequate staffing, are there incentives for hard to fill? How do we overcome some of the insufficient pay to fill the vacancies? Masking was a support mentioned, and again, it was both people requesting enforcing masking or do not enforce masking. So this was a split comment section. Communication, maintain or increase communication to both staff and families related to COVID mitigations. And then cleaning was an area of support, provide more cleaning supplies or staff to assist with maintaining the mitigation strategies. Illness was an area of support, and this was more in general, just an encouragement to students and staff to stay home when showing symptoms, and communication with families on strategies to assist with community spread. Overall, many of the themes mirror what we are hearing from our own families. And once all the survey data has been disaggregated, we will be providing an additional update for the governing board as well as that FAQ to our staff.
Ms. Love, it looks like you have a question there. I don't know if Ms. Marsden, if you've seen that.
It was just
I
a brief,
see it. So
sorry, it was just a brief one. I didn't want to interrupt Dr. Nance, but I don't, can you share, because I don't think I heard clearly because of my internet, what was the percentage between teachers and staff who wanted masks versus who didn't want masks?
Sure, it was 58% said yes, 42% said no out of the 3,700 responses we have.
Thank you. That was the only question I had right now.
Any other
are there any
questions?
other questions from the board?
I have a question. How to put my hand up when I need to ask a question? How do we do that?
If you look at the, like if you move your mouse, Mr. Worth, there's a little panel, a gray panel that comes up and you should see the red thing at the end. There's a hand, so you can click on the hand and raise it, but then you also have to lower your hand as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, Mr. Narducci, I think you had a couple other people going to be presenting information. Thank you, Dr. Nance.
Thank you, Dr. Nance. Also, as you're aware and the public's aware, there have been recent developments in budgeting and budget impacts. And Mrs. Lanaberry, our Chief Financial Officer, wanted to discuss those with you as well. And just initial implications, as we know things are developing rapidly in that area and changing rapidly. Ms. Berry?
Thank you. Madam President, members of the board, I am going to try to simplify a couple of things that have happened with the budget. As you know, we have talked last spring as we were trying to work through the budget about gap funding. You heard about gap funding all spring, and we talked about it when we adopted the budget, that we didn't have the number yet, that it would be finalized.
Let me interrupt.
Yeah.
Remember, two of us were not here last spring, so kind of keep that in mind.
Okay, sounds good. So during the legislative session, the gap funding was a part that we discussed in great detail, because some school districts received a greater amount of federal assistance than other school districts did. So there was a very big disparity between from the American Recovery Act about how much money school districts across Arizona received from the federal allocation. So last spring, school districts worked, especially districts who didn't receive a lot of money from the federal government, on a proposal to the legislature to use additional money that the legislature and the governor received to help kind of minimize that gap between how much federal money the school districts across Arizona got. So we called it gap funding. So when I talked about that, when you all heard about my presentation from the budget, when we put the proposed budget together and the adopted budget, I talked about gap funding. And we said there would be additional $40 to $60 million that would be eligible for Chandler Unified School District. And the reason for that is if you took all the federal money that came in across Arizona, you would see that on average, school districts received over $4,000 per pupil for students across Arizona in every district. Some districts received $9,000, and then there were some school districts that received less than $1,000 per pupil. Chandler received about $1,500 per pupil. So we put a proposal together that said, with the additional money that came in through the governor's office, can we please shore up some of that gap? And so that every district could receive a little bit more to get closer to that median amount of around $4,000 per pupil. That was called gap funding. That was agreed upon. And so the governor, when he approved the budget with the legislature, there was a section in the budget for $350 million. And that money was called learning loss and federal money, and there was reporting that had to take place. So by July 1st, the school districts and charter schools had to report to ADE, whether if you were in person or not in person, for over 100 days last year. Because the governor and the legislator said, we're going to fund you with gap money. We're going to give it to you in two different ways. We're going to give you money. We're going to take if you didn't get $1,800 per pupil, then we're going to backfill that up to, for example, Chandler got a little over $1,500 per pupil. They're going to give us at least $300 per pupil in a grant formula underneath this $350 million. And then there's another piece that they're going to give us. If we were open for 100 days, there was going to be another piece of this, another grant formula that will be available to us because last year we were open for 100 days. So everybody was required underneath the budget to submit their information by July 1st. Then ADE is required to post on the website. They're going to accumulate the information in August, and by August 1st, they were required to post this amount, kind of the grant information, the amount that would be allocated to schools. And so you're starting to see the first piece of that. You see the governor coming out last week. We've been waiting for this grant to come for our allocation of the $350 million. So the first portion came out this week. The governor introduced, and I'm going to share my screen really quick if that's okay. I am going to share the internet piece and hopefully bring it to you to see. Can everybody see the governor's release where it says Governor Ducey announces $163 million to increase per pupil funding? Do you see that?
No, Lana, we see your email.
Oh, okay. Let's see here. Let me try to make sure it's popped up again. Hang on.
There it is.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So ultimately, the governor released information this week on August the 17th for the first portion of the $350 million. And there's $163 million that he released on Monday. And you can, if you want, you're welcome to go to the office of the Governor Ducey and you can read the news release and the information related to it. Each of the organizations that you might be part of have also released information on it. So there's a couple important facts that are going through that. One thing that we know is that this is only 163 of the $350 million, and he's calling it, it's made available through the Federal American Rescue Plan. It's called the Education Plus Up Grant because we have to apply for it. Just like we do with our ESSER funds, we're still, even though we're allocated ESSER funds, we still have to apply for them through a grant process. And so the goal is right down here is of this grant is to give every public school district the opportunity to receive at least $1,800 per pupil funding. So they take how much money we have already received from ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and the Enrollment Stability Grant, all the federal money that's came in. And for Chandler, that's a little over $1,500 per pupil. So the difference between what we've received and $1,800 times the number of students that we have in our district creates this $11 million grant for us. So that's how we know how much we're available for us in this grant. So this grant, you can read through the information. He talks about the funding. You've heard it when I talked to you about gap funding, and he states it in here. In order to close the federal per pupil funding gap, the governor's new grant program will provide supplemental dollars to schools that did not receive as much federal funding. So that's how it's backfilled. Districts, for example, who received a lot of money because of it's related to poverty and free and reduced lunch rates, they aren't eligible. So if you were to go through the Excel list that the state has produced, you would see that school districts like, for example, Mesa Unified School District, Phoenix Union, Tucson, Roosevelt are not eligible for this funding because ultimately they receive more than $1,800 per pupil. So it's the first piece of it. Now, the other piece that comes with it is you saw in the very beginning of his release that it says, he announces it as long as school districts are following all state laws and remain open for the in-person instruction. And so that's where the requirements and the background information, if you were to read through all of it and know some of the decisions that are made, are related to the mask piece, are related to staying open in person. There's not allowing us to put some of those pieces in place because of his requirements. So we're not eligible for those funds if we violate any of those requirements at this point. So that's the update from the governor. We will receive the other portion, which is we think will be equivalent to $40 million for our school district in the next week or two. That's what we're being told. And so we only have one portion of the $350 million, but like I've told all of you, we thought that it was going to be between $40 to $60 million. It's a little bit different than ESSER funds because the governor, this is his allocation. He has the authority over this $350 million. And again, this $163 million is just the first portion of it. There will be a second portion, and that is related to last year if we were open for over 100 days. But according to our lobbyist, it will be underneath the same criteria that these funds are under, and we will have to follow all state laws related to what he's outlined in that agreement to be able to qualify to receive those dollars.
Anna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Olive has a question.
Yes.
I do have a question. So I have a mathematics question. So you said $11 million is what's at stake?
Yes, for the first portion, and then there will be about $40 million at stake in the second portion of the $350 million that is not out yet, but will be released hopefully in the next few weeks.
Okay, so that's the so that 1,800, some of it is in the first portion, and some of it is in the second portion, right?
Well, the 1,800 is only part of the $163 million. So what they did, that's the first piece of the gap funding. And they said every school district who should receive at least $1,800 in federal dollars. So they say, but you have to tell us how much you already got in federal dollars. So Chandler has already received $1,500 in federal amount of money. So that's why it's about $300. They take into account by July 1st, I had to submit in our student count information at the beginning of this fiscal year so they could do this calculation to be able to give us this dollar amount. And we had 40,000 students on May 1st that were in person approximately. So that's why it was a little less than $300 times 40,000 kids. That's how you got to the $11 million.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense now. Thank you.
Yeah. Now the second portion we haven't received yet. So I'm estimating what our allocation will be. It'll be approximately $1,000 per child, and we have 4,000 students. So we think that it'll be approximately $40 million.
Okay. Lindsay, I think you were next.
Yeah, so my question would be, what bearing does the Phoenix Union decision have on this if we're not breaking any laws until after the 29th?
So I've asked our lobbyist that question, and I was given some information based on that. So the Phoenix Union decision was a lawsuit from an individual to the Phoenix Union, and it was in a court that is a lower court that actually can be appealed, and it was between those two parties. Depends on what people's view on if that impacts the entire state or doesn't impact the state. The difference is this is federal dollars that are passed through the governor that the governor has discretion on, and that he can ultimately outline how it can be spent and who is eligible for it. So the governor is ultimately stating in a criteria of what he believes you're eligible for or not eligible for. And that's up for discussion, and unfortunately, that's his way of explaining how he's going to give it to you, and there's criteria in that. So Phoenix Union really doesn't impact this federal funding piece. The ESSER money that was already given, ESSER 1, 2, 3, and an enrollment stability grant have nothing to do with this pot of money. And so they're not in jeopardy. That's something completely different because those have been allocated directly, through the federal, through us. However, the Coronavirus Relief Act, the amount that he's eligible to give out is $350 million, and he can have attachments and he can have specific strings that are attached to those because it's money that's directed through him. So unfortunately, we believe we have to abide by those at this point. We don't have anyone telling us that we don't. And I believe we got some council opinions on that when we all met also.
What about with what President Biden said yesterday with regards to going after governors who are essentially coming after school districts for following CDC guidelines? Like, couldn't the federal government just come in and take that money away?
Sure, and I heard about that also. I've been reading, I asked questions about that today also. And there could be a point where for President Biden does come in, and I think there could be some lawsuits and it will be held up in the court system. But the thing I worry about with everything that goes through the courts is it takes a lot of time. When things go into a court battle and into a lawsuit, it's never finished in a very timely fashion, especially when it's related to funding. It takes a long period of time. That might change, but that's been our experience. But right now we have a lot of people upset about it. Right now the governor is stating that you need to follow all the applicable laws. And then we have heard that the president is going to come in and assist potentially with that, but we don't know what that means at this point. So
is it possible for them to expedite it in this case? Because that's kind of what it was looking like today with some of the reports in the news with the Secretary of Education sending a strongly worded letter and being advised to go after governors who were blocking school districts from doing the right thing.
Sure. And that I wish I knew the answer to that, Lindsay. I wish I knew and understood what we would be and would not be held accountable for. But unfortunately, this grant application is now due on September the 3rd. And so we're under timeframes for even this grant application. But I think that we're going to hear more about that and understand more coming up, because unfortunately you see where the governor is and then you see the news from President Biden. And unfortunately, I don't think we know what the final outcome is going to be. I wish we did, but we don't know that at this point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Worth.
Lan, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
Give me worst case number.
I think the worst case number is up to 60 million total. I think best, we're going to get between 40 to 60 million. So if we get over $1,200 per pupil or up to $1,500 per pupil in the next allocation, I think that those will be under the same rules as the allocation that you just saw for the 11 million that, have really specific stipulations on there that we have to follow. So between the 11 million that is part of the $163 million grant, and then the next rollout of the funding that will be for us being open last year for over 100 days, that could be an additional $40 million. So it's probably going to be around, maybe I should say between $50 million. If we get more than $1,200 per pupil, then that could go up to $60 million.
Okay, so what strings are attached?
Sure, there are a number of strings that are attached.
Let me say it differently. Can we hire staff? Can we pay raises with the money?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that question, Mr. Worth. There was a lot of things to do. This was about loss of learning. So the money for GAP funding was extremely important for us. That's why we wrote and worked on the bill related to GAP funding. Other districts were receiving a lot more money in the federal realm. We are able, this year, we've had to hire additional staff to meet the needs and the mitigation plans of our school district. Also, loss of learning is critical for our district. So there's a number of things that we want to do with loss of learning to make sure that our kids are prepared. A great example of that is at Hill Academy, they're starting Saturday classes. There's a number of things that we want to do to help with loss of learning. The other areas that we need help with is technology. As you know, we're trying to get ready for our future-ready schools. So are we prepared for the future in technology? Also, these funds are good for 3 years. So we know we have the ability, for GAP funding for 2 years, ESSER money for 3. So we're trying to build a plan to help us bridge the next 2 to 3 years to help us with loss of learning and to prepare us for the future. The other, I think that's important is that we know that we're struggling getting workers to come in for our food and nutrition, for our paraprofessionals, for our custodians, our groundskeeper, our bus drivers. So there's a potential that we'll use funds to try to attract those so that we can support our system on the support side of the house. So there's a number of things that we'll address. We'll also help try to mitigate all of the COVID issues that we're having or potentially could have in the future. So we'll use dollars to help us with that. And that will continue for 2 years with GAP funding and 3 years with ESSER funding. Did that answer your question?
Yes, but I have another question. So
Sure.
Go ahead.
this is for Wendy Nance. Wendy, this is just kind of relates to what Lana said. I've heard complaints within the community of the bureaucracy of trying to get employed by the district. I just think that needs to be looked at and try to speed that process up. Just a thought for you. That's all.
If you have any specifics, Joel, that would be very helpful. I know we have been working very hard to get them in as fast as possible. I know we staffed one teacher in less than 24 hours this week. Our substitutes are coming on board through ESI and our end within 5 days. So if you have a specific, I'm happy to follow up on and see where we had a breakdown.
Okay. Do you want me to go through Frank, or do you want me to meet directly with you on it?
You can share.
You can go directly through Dr. Nance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Narducci. Thank you, Mrs. Berry. We appreciate it. Obviously, these funds are going to be really used for our students and to make sure that we can patch up those learning losses that they have experienced over the last year and several months. So thank you.
You're
Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Mr. Narducci.
Madam President, members of the board, I want to be able to provide you some options and provide you some pros and cons that we have been working on with the various options. These are no way to push an option in front of any of the board members, but to prompt discussion that there are many ways to look at this as we move forward. And then I wanted to provide those opportunities for the board for discussion. Followed by that, I would like to talk about a few options we did not look at just simply because of the modeling that we've done or other school districts have done and given us advisement under. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up a document right now that that discusses various options for your discussion, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Madam President, to have discussion with your board. Option one would have no modifications to the current mitigation plan. When a school's threshold for confirmed cases reaches 1% for high schools, 1.5% for junior high schools, 2% for elementary schools, mitigation strategies are increased at the impacted site for a minimum of 2 weeks. Masks remain strongly recommended, but optional. This plan was built to provide consistency through September 29th, 2021 and beyond. Individualized to site impact, which means we were using localized data, which we had developed through the county and through state, saying it's best to use localized data. And if you can key in on site-specific data, that's even better. Parental choice of face covering is provided in this option. It also protects funding as we know of it today. And this plan was created on an assumption cases would be present and that cases would increase. Again, it's not a plan to stop COVID. We know that no mitigation plans can do that, but it was developed to prevent spread. The cons of this plan, however, are based on CDC and other health agencies. Mitigation strategies are not maximized. You make that a little bigger so you all can see that and the public can see that. Some age groups are not able to be vaccinated as a parental choice. So those are two aspects of this plan or option that would not be favorable. Another option, and we can have questions afterwards, is a modification to the current mitigation plan. This would be requiring temporary face coverings for all students and staff at all district schools and facilities. Face coverings would not be required outdoors. This would provide also in this option a provision for authorization to the superintendent or me to remove the temporary face covering requirement as of September 29, 2021 to meet the state law which prevents school districts and district governing boards from mandating face coverings in schools. The pros to this option are consistency across schools. It does provide a layer of protection for children that cannot be vaccinated. And per CDC recommendation, may not need to be quarantined, as is a county requirement. The cons to this option are it removes choice of mask wearing, its potential impact on funding, does not consider individual school or localized data, and may be temporary through September 29th, and schools cannot control current status of lack of mitigation in the community. Option 3 is a modification to the current mitigation plan to include temporary face coverings as an additional mitigation strategy for students and staff while indoors when a school's threshold for confirmed cases reaches 1% for high school, 1.5 for junior highs, and 2% for elementary schools. So the current thresholds. The mitigation strategies are increased at the impacted site for a minimum of 2 weeks. Masks remain strongly recommended but optional for those sites that do not meet the threshold. Provide authorization to the superintendent to remove the temporary face covering requirement as of September 29, 2021 to meet the state law which prevents school districts and district governing boards from mandating face coverings in schools. The positive to option 3, or the pros, are it provides us another increased layer of mitigation at schools when the localized data shows that it's needed. It's individualized data and mitigation based on local data and school site data. It's temporary wearing of face coverings during a high threshold period only may lessen, will also lessen quarantine. And what I want to speak to that as a pro, when there is, based on CDC recommendations and county mandates right now in quarantining, if students are mask to mask, that lessens the quarantine, such as other things may as well. The cons to this plan is based on CDC and other health agencies recommended mitigation strategy is not it's not maximized across our district, our whole district. Its potential does have a potential to impact funding, and there are some age groups that are not able to be vaccinated as a parental choice. And so that's the only pieces of this when you add the face coverings to the existing mitigation plans that we're doing now to maximize that during that threshold. Option 4 includes a modification to the current mitigation plan to include a reduction of thresholds by 0.25. So this means that we would lower thresholds at all levels. The modification will reduce school thresholds of confirmed positive cases to 0.75 for high schools, 0.25 for junior high schools, for 0.75% for elementary schools, 1.75% for elementary schools. The mitigation strategies are increased at the impacted site for a minimum of 2 weeks. As Dr. Gilbert presented our cases and case rates as of today, the pros are that this will increase a layer of mitigation at schools earlier, as they would hit thresholds earlier. And then individualized data and mitigation based on the local data and school site. So we would still utilize individual data from those areas. And again, these thresholds are used because our community rates are in the substantial. The cons are, based on CDC and other health agencies, recommended mitigation strategies are not maximized across the board. Potential impact to funding, and some age groups are still not able to be vaccinated as a parental choice. So that's option 4. Option 5 is a modification to a current mitigation plan, which would be requiring temporary face coverings for students who attend elementary and junior high school. Face coverings would not be required outdoors, provides authorization to the superintendent to remove the temporary face covering requirement as of September 29th, 2021 to meet the state law, which prevents school districts and district governing boards from mandating face coverings in schools. The pros for this option are that it's a maximum mitigation for those who cannot be fully vaccinated as a parental choice, and per CDC recommendation, may not need to be quarantined at the higher rates if students are mask to mask. That would cut down on the quarantining requirements that are law. The cons are potential funding impact. We do then limit choice of parents in face covering, and then not maximizing mitigation at high schools where social distancing of schools is probably the most difficult to achieve. As we heard that also in the survey data that Dr. Nance shared. So those are the 5 options, and I will review them again. The option 1 is no modifications to the current mitigation plan. Option 2 is requiring temporary face coverings for all students and staff at all district schools and facilities. Face coverings would not be required outdoors. Option 3, temporary face coverings as an additional layer of mitigation for students and staff while indoors and when a school's threshold is met. And then option 4, a modification to current mitigation plan to include a reduction to thresholds by 0.25 at all levels. Option 5, requiring temporary face coverings for students who attend elementary and junior high schools. Those 2 groupings were basically targeted, based on vaccinations not available for that age group up to 12 years, which would be on both those campuses. So those are our 5 options that we just wanted to discuss with the board before they had their discussion, that they could review. I think you have the options in front of you. If not, I did send those earlier. A few options that were not discussed. If I can go over those really quickly.
Yes.
Okay. A few options that, let me take this down to unshare. A few options that we're not recommending based on modeling that we have done or other districts have done, and conversations that I've had with those superintendents. There was a mask requirement with an opt-out option, and that was a popular choice when people and school districts were trying to make it an easy transition for parents of saying, hey, we're going to require masks, but you can opt out if you'd like to. And so some school districts have offered this to ease the mask required option. It was very difficult to manage, as we hear. School districts have placed a limit on the number of opt-outs allowed when they saw that the opt-outs were too high. So there was a time frame where you could be opting in or out. And then after that, those parents that had decided to opt out were not able to. It also reflected a lot of the strongly recommend and strongly encouraging masking, which we have right now. It was just a backwards way to get to it. We also understand that when you have a mandate and then an opt-out, maybe more individuals will take masking or face covering as a mitigation strategy seriously and be able to assist their schools to be able to provide safe environments for their students. So one of the big pieces that we saw was that it was difficult to manage even at school sites. The second option that we had modeled, or other districts had modeled for us, is the segregation of masked classrooms versus non-masked classrooms. And I think we might have seen this in some of our emails as well that came to us in the last few days. Besides the association and impacts of grouping children all day by mask or no mask, the ability to make this occur can happen in small scale. So meaning we might be able to find a few situations in the district where we can make that work. However, in elementary schools, district-wide, they'd have difficulty in creating balanced classrooms. It would require multi-graded classrooms, or a grade level could have an imbalance of multi-graded classrooms, which means there might be 40 kids in one class if there's only 3 sections, and there might be 3 to 10 in another class. So teachers would have to take on that burden of multi-grading and having multi-graded classrooms where we couldn't make it fit. In addition, as I said, we'd have high enrollments in some classrooms and low enrollments in others, and providing this option through secondary schedule would be impossible based on the complexity of their master schedule. They just wouldn't be able to do that. So even, like I said, in the modeling, it works in a small scale. It may work in a school or a few classrooms in that school, but when you do it large scale, it doesn't fit, one size doesn't fit all in that option. So Madam President, if there are any other options or combinations of options that the board would like us to model at specific grade levels, we will work with staff to make that a priority and to get that information back to you if that's needed to make a decision after this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Narducci. I believe Mr. Olive has his hand up and has a couple questions, or one question.
Well, just one. I'd like to move that we adopt option number 1 as presented by Mr. Narducci.
Is there a second?
Second, Joel.
Okay, I guess we will start with some discussion then. I guess I do have, I'm going to ask a question of Mr. Narducci. Or I guess it's Mrs. Nance or Dr. Nance. When we looked at our staff numbers for the pros and the cons for yes masks or no masks, do we have any kind of a breakdown of at what grade levels we were seeing yeses or nos? Are we looking at, was there a difference between high school, junior high, and elementary schools?
Madam President, I do not have that information currently. I could look at it. I wouldn't have it tonight. We're just going to have to, our answers we had pulled by yes and no. I would just have to go in and pull them by site as well.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay.
I think Mr. Worth may have been next.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. So Mr. Worth, go ahead.
Lindsay, you can go first and I'll wait after.
Okay, I just had like a few questions. But in terms of the sick leave piece, Dr. Nance, particularly with our staff, how is that being handled right now? Because my concern is if we are having staff come in and they're sick, right, but they don't have enough sick time, how does that work?
Sure. Thank you, Lindsay. As you're aware, last year we had the first semester was covered with our federal COVID leave mandate. That was lifted at the end of December. Governing board voted to approve Chandler cover and extend that leave with our employees. So what that looked like is for the child care leave or the COVID leave, an employee could access that 10 days one time for it. Currently, we do not have that in action. So what we do is if an employee is out of leave or short of leave, it's similar to what we would do if they had pneumonia for 2 weeks or if they had surgery, or what we do first of all is we see if there's any leave that we can front load them. Sometimes they have it available, or we'll swap out and they'll come and work a day for us at spring break or a project in the summer to try and swap those days. If they need an unpaid, then we try to spread it out to minimize it like over the rest of the year so they don't take a whole paycheck unpaid. So we work through our benefits and Dr. Falloon, who helps us with our leaves, just to look on how we can minimize the payroll impact on that. If an employee exceeds 20 days out, we do have a sick leave bank that can be accessed as well, that employees donate in, and we can grant from fellow employees for that person.
Okay. And then in terms of when kids are out sick, and I know you probably may not be the best person to answer this question, we've gotten a lot of comments in terms of we're encouraging them to stay home, but what are we doing for them when they're home to make sure they are caught up on work?
I think I'm going to defer that, Ms. Love, to both Dr. Gilbert and Leo Schluter, because they have been working with the principals on that.
When students are out sick, we have our Google Classroom where our teachers are putting content for students, as well as being able to be available for students when, whether it's through email or through phone calls, some of the same connections that our teachers and our students have now. But currently what we have is our Google Classroom where content is put in for students to be able to make up work and work with their teachers.
Okay. And then I know that we've talked about pool testing and the reasons that admin did not want to go with that option. But if the proposal is for us to do no modifications to our current mitigation strategies, and, you know, we've had emails from several like doctors and public health officials, and we're one of very few districts that are doing the pool testing. And so it just kind of feels like our mitigation strategies don't really have teeth, from what I'm hearing from public health experts, without a pool testing option. So is that something that if we're not going to decide on that today, can we have somebody from county health come in and present that option and what that might look like for our district in a future board meeting?
Ms. Love, Dr. Gilbert, did you want to respond to that, or?
Yeah, I will. I think we can bring anyone in that the board would like to see and have a presentation to be able to share, you know, and have someone that can give you a deeper look into the pool testing. The difficulty, again, with pool testing has to do with you really want to have a collective group that is in agreement, or when you're trying to do a pool testing and you don't have a large number, say in a classroom, that actually willing to test or will test, you know, you end up in an unfortunate situation. But what we have been doing since our last conversation is seeing what other options that we have in regards to testing in the district. I know that Ms. Hartley and Mr. Rother have been looking into what we can do for testing. The problem is you hear at times that it's free, and it really isn't free to the district, or it's not free to our families. We have been in conversations, and I probably would turn this over to Mr. Rother. He might be able to share a little more, but we are in conversations of where we might be able to get tests within the district that are truly free for our families. So we're working on that currently, and we think we would get more out of that than if we were moving to the pool testing. Mr. Rother, have I left anything out, or Ms. Hartley?
Sure. Let me, just to piggyback Dr. Gilbert's comments, we are currently in discussions with Maricopa County, and one of their partners, actually the same partner that was able to provide the testing last spring when we did that out of our old transportation yard. So we are looking at an option to do rapid testing 5 days a week, and actually be able to deploy that testing to some of our hotspot schools or regions where we know that we have higher community spread. And those would be those rapid tests with the 15-minute turnaround time. So if a student needs that to come back to school, or a teacher just needs the peace of mind, they can get that rather quickly. So that just came through pretty much mid this week. So we're hoping to be able to finalize that and get something in place to start next week.
Okay. And then I'm also hearing too that our communication in terms of encouraging masks, we have not been providing that in multiple languages. And so we have families who are showing up and they don't know what the situation is. Are we working on that currently to get some information out to our families who don't speak English?
Yeah, we are. A lot of the messaging is going out, and I don't know if Mr. Locke is available here online, but Terry, if you are, just reconfirm if I'm stating this correctly, but a lot of our information that has gone out is going out through School Messenger, which based on the language of choice, the parent chooses to receive their information, they would be getting it there. We are working with efforts to maximize our communications to our monolingual Spanish speakers, and so we're making efforts right now. We'd love to enhance that. I've been working with parents to make sure that our communications are understood. We also have put signage on doors of all entry in both English and Spanish where our populations would be served to make sure that those are visible and that our parents would be able to seek that as well. Mr. Locke, is there anything you'd like to add to that to give clarification? Or
no, I think you nailed it. We put everything out in English and Spanish, goes on School Messenger. Again, the choice of the individual, and then also working with the schools on things that they're doing as well, and the signage. So confirming what you just said, Mr. Narducci.
So if a parent chooses Mandarin for that School Messenger would go to them in Mandarin, Chinese?
No, it actually doesn't. It's not built in for Mandarin. It's English and Spanish, because that's what our Infinite Campus system will tolerate.
Okay, so not any language, but English and Spanish.
Correct.
Okay.
So we're missing I see the emails going out for requests for translators every day. So we're missing a portion of our population who is not getting accurate information. And that is also a population that has been targeted with disinformation around vaccines. And so I'm wondering, I know that it's not incumbent upon just our district to be doing this work, but I'm wondering if we could be doing more in that particular area.
No, I do believe, Ms. Love, that our website is able to be translated into various languages. And Mr. Locke, could you respond to that?
Yes, over 100 languages. They'll look at it in their choice of language. And a lot of people have, if you're a Spanish speaker, typically your phone will be set to Spanish. If you go to ESPN or AZ Central or Chandler Unified, you're going to get the Spanish version.
But I'm concerned too about the fact that these are also families who may not have computer access. So what are we doing in terms of letters home?
Yes. So those we're working on in English and Spanish for our main population targets. We don't have the ability to do written, and that's why we try to keep it in the system format. But we are looking at translation services. As I've been meeting with parents and working forward on this, we are working on translation services and also being able to augment our front office with a bilingual individual in our front office that will help as people come in and need to be assisted, or even just call that we can assist them better. So we're working on trying to modify those things, and it's time that we did. And then a certified translator we're looking at bringing on board, and it's something that we should have here in the next hopefully the next month. We do have to bring that position to you to approve, and we're doing that, I believe Wednesday.
Okay. And so I told you I had a lot of questions. I was writing the entire time.
You're fine.
I really apologize, Mr. Worth. But with regards to the dashboard, I know that, we've had conversations about the dashboard, right? And the fact that we're one of very few districts that are actually doing that, right? But I just have concerns in terms of these are the cases that we're catching, right? That are being reported to us by county health and being reported to us by parents. But what happens when people don't get tested, right? Because that's been our concern over time is, if we had gone with one of these other options, like an option 3, for instance, that would have been very easily manipulated by families who, instead of testing, would keep their kid home for 2 weeks, right? And then we're not doing the contact tracing and alerting families properly, right? So I'm just wondering, as we're making these decisions, and it's not just for a question for you guys, but also a question for our board in terms of we know that this is happening in the community, right? We know, nationally that we have parents who are sending children in sick intentionally, right? And so my concern with keeping option 1 really And I understand that there are some, reasons financially why maybe members would not want to go with like an option 2. I would personally do that. But with keeping option 1, we're not really doing anything to protect our community overall. And while choice is great, right? Like we all want choice. I think we have to take into consideration that this is a public health crisis and personal decisions impact the public's health, right? And so that's my concern too with our dashboard is like, these are just the cases that we're catching, and we know that we are not catching a lot of cases overall. So I just wanted to voice that. I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that, Mr. Narducci, in terms of like, things that you've discussed with other districts or superintendents that I may not be aware of.
Sure. I feel the dashboard is a level of transparency that some districts won't go to. And is it perfect? No, but I don't know if even the data we're getting is perfect anywhere. I know because it's data in, data out. We don't know how that data has been performed. We don't know what case rates occur. But we have information, and some people rely on that and feel it's good, and other people question it and feel that it's not good. And again, it kind of mirrors our community's thoughts on the topic, period. As I say, based on what people want to see, they see, and I can't change that. And a lot of that falls on both sides of the sword. The case rates that we do put on days that it's high, we become very vulnerable. The days it's low, we are blessed with the fact that knowing that spread rate is low, that it changes daily, and it's good information in is the best we can do at that point. Dr. Gilbert and Ms. Hartley, if there's anything you want to add, Ms. Hartley is our Director of Health Services. And is there anything you'd like to add to that to help answer that question for Ms. Love?
I would just like to add, just to tack on to what you said, Mr. Narducci. I brought this up in the last board meeting. It's a difficult situation because on one side we have people that don't trust the dashboard, but at the same time they want us to continue the dashboard. So we're doing the best that we can from the sense of transparency of controlling what we can control, right? And I understand and understand what you were sharing, that you'll have some that will just stay home, right, and not test. You'll have some that are, and it's nothing malicious, it's just not feeling good, so you stay home. And so for us, it's a matter of having something that we can control in the sense of what data we have, whether we're getting the information from parents or we're getting the information from the county, but the data that is there is the data that we have. Other than that, I understand there might be some frustrations, but going back to what Mr. Narducci had said, we get it from both sides. But what I will say that's a fact, and that is our schools and our staff. Ms. Hartley's staff is working tirelessly, day in and day out, at night, on weekends, so that data is there. And so I will say that for those that don't want to see it, I'm okay with that. But there are families that would like to see it, and I know our staff is working really hard. And I'm not saying that you didn't say that. I'm just saying.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I want to be clear, Dr. Gilbert and Ms. Hartley. This is not an indictment of any of the work that you guys are doing as district employees. I do see that you guys are doing the best that you can, and it's a heavy lift, right? We have a community that's on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? But I think that, one of the things that I think might be a little bit more helpful in terms of like the transparency on the dashboard too, is maybe having a statement on there that clearly stipulates that this does not account for the cases that have not been reported to us, so that people know what they're looking at. And I think another thing too is that we have our total active cases at the top, right? But then we have like our cases that have been resolved in the columns, right? I really think that we should have a cumulative column at the top so that people know what the cases have been looking like from first day of school to today, instead of people having to go through the weeds, break out a calculator and figure out cumulatively how many cases have we had. I just think that would be better for transparency. And I don't know if anybody else agrees with that, right? That's just me. And I'm sure like other people will kind of chime in.
Yeah. Ms. Love, the only thing I want to caution is that even the county data moves swiftly through time periods, so that all cases do not depict where the spread is in specific regions and zones. And so I just want to make sure that we understand that the active cases are there. Those that come back that are resolved actually are stronger for those students that come back, because within 90 days, they are also able to reduce their quarantine based on the fact if they were a positive case. I would like to address your concern about whether a parent does or does not send their kid to school and knowing that they may be sick and knowing that they may have COVID. I would hope that none of our community members would put any students, because in that type of a dangerous situation, not only their children, but other children, others' children. So I would hope that that would not be the case. With that said, we can only control what we can control. And the other part is Hartley and myself, we've been working with the county for test distributions that would go out of our schools. These are home tests. They're antigen tests. And again, the county doesn't want a whole lot of antigen tests because there is mistakes that are made with large numbers of, there's an error rate basically, or statistically. So, but we will have those available. We're asking our parents to request those because we don't have a big abundance. The county will keep supplying us with that. But if they think their child is symptomatic, is maybe quarantined, wants to return that student here, because on the 5th or 6th day they can come back. In addition to that, as Mr. Rother said, and Ms. Hart's been working on, and that is not my companion, so I don't have a dog in my office, but
I'm allergic to dogs, so that's not me.
all right. So
Maybe whoever has the dog barking could mute their microphone temporarily.
I would like to say that we are looking at options to bring testing pieces on campuses. We cannot distribute that through our offices. Our health offices are bogged down right now with contact tracing. There's a lot of work that goes through that. Our administrators are bogged down with that as well. And that's a requirement of the county. I was just on the phone with them today, and those are requirements that we will be discussing with our community that are changing based on their mandating in the quarantine area. We will definitely communicate that with our parents when we communicate out any other changes.
And I just kind of like, I would hope that nobody is like intentionally sending their child to school sick, right? But, I used to work as a manager, right? And I know that when you as an employee are expected to be at work and you don't have childcare, you send a child to school sick, right? Regardless of it, whether it's COVID-19 or the flu or the cold, right? And so I think that that's something that we need to be looking at too, right? Like I'm going to assume the best intention and assume that, when people are sending their sick child to school, there was an issue there with childcare, or they didn't know and the child developed symptoms, while on site. I have seen some things online, but, I don't know if people are just speaking that, out of frustration or if that's actually true. But, it does happen, right? Pre-COVID and now. So I think that's something to be cognizant of. Sorry.
And Lindsay, I think that our community did a beautiful job of not sending kids sick, or not sending sick kids to school last year. The incident rates of kids, being in school and getting sick and things were quite significant, that we did not have those. Parents were very, very much aware of when their child was sick and not sending them to school. And I would hope that would continue this year. And so, just a few bad eggs in it, I don't think should ruin it for the entire community. And I think that we're probably talking about just a few individuals who have really probably, very difficult circumstances that may do something like this, but it's not the general consensus of the community that they're deliberately. So,
yeah, but I think still to that point, like, I think I would like to see something, just on the dashboard that, like, hey, like, this is, these are reported cases to us, right? Like, of course there's going to be some, room for error. Like, people are going to just keep their kids home and not test, right? For a multitude of reasons, right? It doesn't mean that, they didn't, maliciously were like, I'm not getting my child tested, right? It might just be, oh, I didn't have the transportation to get to the, testing center.
Right.
But I think,
we also know that, some of these have either are asymptomatic or minimal symptomatic or may mimic allergies or whatever. And parents may not get their child tested because they don't believe that it even is COVID, or that they don't even think that they're ill.
I think that would be kind of a reason to at least have a statement on there. Like, I don't think it takes that much energy to just kind of put that statement out there.
Can I offer a solution there? Anything that goes on the dashboard are confirmed cases. So they're only ones that could be confirmed by the county. So I think we can add to that language, no problem. Because I believe it does say that there are confirmed cases, and have to be confirmed either by seeing the information through the report or a county confirmation. And the county is stepping up their pieces to notify. They know they're understaffed and have pushed a lot of this onto the schools. And so they're starting to offer school districts a little more assistance. We think that's going to take a little time before it gets to us, but they are making that effort.
Mm-hmm. And, I just also want to just say, and then I will, turn it over. I think it's Mr. Worth.
Joel's next.
But, in terms of, I think this is just kind of like a really interesting option, just given the fact that the teacher survey indicated that teachers are having a hard time with social distancing and cleaning, right? So I think if we leave here without making any modifications, knowing that information, that sends a pretty strong message in terms of like how we're taking this seriously. And so I'm wondering if maybe there could be something, that could be spoken to about that. Like, I know that in our secondary schools, certainly social distancing may not be an option, right? Like, we've all been to those high schools and seen how full the hallways can get alone or classes can get. But it's that. And then my other thing with this is, what is the implication if we mandated our staff to be masked? Because the things that I can only speak for the emails that I'm getting. I'm assuming everybody's getting the same emails, but it's really disheartening that we are recommending masks, right? And strongly recommending them. But, you have families who are on both sides of the equation who have pointed out that, but their teachers aren't masked. Like, admin is not masked. We watch your meetings. Sometimes you guys aren't masked, right? And so, I think that just having a sign to say strongly recommend masking without our staff and our admin doing that and acting in that and modeling that lacks teeth and becomes a bit of a joke. You might as well remove the signs at that point. That's all I have.
Sure. No, thank you. Let me remind the board that you can add, these options were presented to you just by us saying, here's some viable options. Some add more layers of mitigation, some don't. You can look at options, combine options, or come up with what you'd like us to look at in an option to be able to see how we can assist that. These aren't stagnant options. They're just options that we brought to you to at least start the discussion and be able to have a discussion about that. Dr. Nance, I think Ms. Love asked a couple questions about having staff participate in a mandatory piece. Now, I know there's not any mandatory requirements of any authorities out there that state that the staff is to be masked. So do you want to add to that?
May I, Mr. Narducci, may I interrupt? I do believe that the, the statute that was listed with Phoenix Union and all that was really based on the fact that the requirement was for staff to be masked, and I believe that falls under the same situation as student masking. They don't distinguish between students and staff with that.
Okay.
But I do want to kind of hear from like Dr. Nance on that as well.
Currently, we have it as optional. So there is no mandatory for masks. It can't be enforced with teachers or even administrators to go in and say, hey, you have to wear one at this point in time, because there's no consequence that would occur with it only being optional. So we do have signage. We have sent out communication to staff and parents using the words we strongly recommend. And then we've also had the language in some of our mitigation strategies. But there is not anything with teeth in it right now that would give permission to go in and mandate it unless some verbiage changed from our board.
Okay, thank you.
I think Joel's been waiting for a minute.
That's an understatement.
Okay, Mr. Worth, I think you had some questions. You need to turn your microphone on.
On?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So what is pool testing? I didn't understand what that is.
Do you want me to answer that?
Somebody, I don't care who.
Okay, it's where everybody in the class gets a swab. They swab their nose, and they all put their swabs into one container and they test that. And if somebody comes back positive, then all the individuals will have to have an individual test. But they just run one test for the whole classroom, and they pool all the samples.
Are we doing that?
Well, if I can add, what's really, I'm sorry, Ms. Hartley, did you want to add?
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say the important piece that I think needs to be shared for pool testing is that parents have to approve for that to occur. So you have to opt in to do it. So if you have a class of 25 and all 25 want to do it, then you're good. The other thing that's important is they do that test, and it's a 24-hour turnaround. So if you're doing that test, my understanding is that you'd be out of school for that time frame while you're waiting for the test to come back. And then if there's positives, then there's another round of tests that.
But my question is, are we doing it?
We are not.
No, we are not.
Okay.
One is we talked last board meeting, Ms. Worth, in the presentation, we talked about the community being split, and there weren't probably enough people to actually be in that pool. But once that pool is established, you have to eliminate that whole group on a positive test. So that's a little different than us looking case by case by student and being a little bit more specific on that student.
Okay.
Mr. Narducci, do we have a number of participants or a percent of participants in a classroom that would be required for effective pool testing?
I'm going to leave that to Lindsay Hartley. Lindsay, on your knowledgeable factors about pool testing, what percentage would have to be a part of it? We know the people that decide not to be a part of it would be eliminated from being excluded because they didn't participate in the pool testing. Can you give us more information?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I did meet with several different people regarding pool testing, and unfortunately they couldn't give me percentages based on numbers that we may have. They did say that pool testing pulls out about 1% of positive cases. So really it's about early identification of, students who may be asymptomatic and in the classroom and test positive. So that pool test, like Barb says, each person who has consented to that test will swab in the morning. The tests are all collected in the same bin. They're all run at the same time. they cannot tell who is positive from that because they are all run at the same time. So from that, if they determine that one person out of those testing was positive, they have to go back and retest everyone individually. So you may have 3 students who have signed up to get tested each day. You may have 20, but each day that process, or it doesn't have to be each day, it can be each week. Each time that testing is done, it's only the kids who have signed up. They look for the one positive in the pool. If there is a positive, those kids are out until they can be retested, and the process starts over again.
Okay, so can I move on?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things that Lindsay brought up that I feel kind of strongly about is if staff test positive for COVID and there's proof, to me the quarantine time should not account against their sick leave, and they should be paid for that time. If there's proof of it, I feel strong about that, in fairness to the staff. The other thing is, in option number 1, remember we can always revisit it if there's a problem. Also, the rates in my world seem pretty low. And then the other thing to keep in mind is, in 30 days, we have to go to the voluntary masking. If we don't, I'm not going to take the chance of losing my immunity because I go against state law. I'm not going to do it. It's too dangerous. The other thing is, if we do an option other than 1, I'd sure like to see some wording in there like staff and parents can opt out in writing to protect the funding. I just don't think it's, considering we're looking at a 30-day period, I don't think it's worth losing $50 to $60 million in funding that we can use to sanitize the facility and provide staff and so forth. Then I want to tell a little something that I ran into. This is not scientific, and I apologize to you, but I was in Houston for 17 days, and they're very proud of being independent. No mask. I wasn't wearing a mask. They weren't wearing a mask. Just before I left to come back to Arizona, there were all kinds of notices in the paper that their rates had exploded. So I happened to go to a Kroger's grocery store, same as Fry's, very, very big. I walked in there and immediately got uncomfortable. I was the only person in there that didn't have a mask on. I just was impressed that a community that was voluntary was doing the right thing. And I think, in my opinion, just people in general try to do the right thing. And I think that helps option number 1. That's it. Thank you.
All right. I think that, let's see, Joel, Jason, your hand is still up. Do you have another question?
Yes, ma'am, but Lindsay was before me, I believe.
Okay, Lindsay, do you still have another question?
No, I forgot to put my hand down.
Okay. Jason?
Yes, when I was doing some tours around the last couple of weeks, that was one of the things that I encountered that teachers were nervous about, was getting time off if they had COVID or if they got quarantined or something like that. So that, Joel, you are pretty spot on that people are worried about that. And if it's for the health of our kids, then a teacher has to be quarantined. It makes sense to have some kind of time off for the teachers.
Okay.
One.
Joel?
One last thing I forgot. I was in one of the doctor's offices and they had a new app. Hold on a second, I got a dog problem.
Joel, can I move to Mrs. Bruner? She has a question. Her hand's up.
Yeah, then come back to me after the dog.
Okay. Mrs. Bruner?
So we're just doing, to clarify, we're just doing questions right now, or?
We are discussing this motion that's on the table.
So I did have one question, and that was to clarify with the procedures to make sure I'm understanding correctly. I don't know if this is Mrs. Hartley or someone else. So when we quarantine, if both the person who was positive for COVID and the individuals who were exposed, if they're both wearing masks, are they not quarantined? I believe that's a new guideline.
It's actually if they're in the 3 to 6 foot range and they're both masked, then they're not quarantined. 0 to 3 feet would still require a quarantine. And then the options, the different options to possibly lessen the quarantine would come into play for those 0 to 3 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I just wanted to say, go ahead, Mr. Worth.
Go ahead, Mrs. Bruner.
I just wanted to say thank you to all the families and staff and community folks, including people who work in, emergency rooms, pediatricians, epidemiologists, and other medical professionals that have been contacting us. I really appreciate you taking the time to, give input. I appreciate all the emails we've received, even in just the last couple of days, that clearly this is an issue that many people feel very strongly about. We know we have, both sides in our community. And I just wanted to say that, because, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but I'm not a medical professional. I have to trust what the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the state health department, and the county health department are telling us. We've gone over this many times, so I'm not going to hash out all the details again. But thank you.
Thank you. Joel.
And, this is kind of indirect, but when I was at a doctor's office, they have a new app literally where you walk by the app and it takes your temperature. Now, I realize that would be cumbersome for the school district, but it might be a helpful tool if it was necessary to use, and you literally just walk by it. And it would pick up the fever.
Thank you. Well, at this point in time, we do have a motion on the table, and if there is no more, Mrs. Bruner, did you want to put your hand down, or did you have another question? Thank you. Okay, if we're pretty much done with the discussion, we'll go ahead and vote on this motion, and that was option number 1. It was moved by Mr. Olive and seconded by Mr. Worth, and that is that basically there's no change in the mitigation strategies that we're utilizing currently. So all those in favor, I think I'll just go ahead and do a roll call vote on this one because it's hard to hear everyone. Let's start with Mrs. Bruner.
No.
Ms. Love?
No.
Mr. Olive?
Aye.
Mr. Worth?
Aye.
And Mrs. Mosden? Aye. The motion carries. Let's
So how and
see.
when does this get told to the community?
I think they already know.
Is this, I thought this was like an
Mr.
executive.
Narducci, your microphone is off.
Thank you. If there's no other motions on the floor, I would imagine that you would give us the authority to communicate that this evening to our families. We do have to also communicate out some quarantine guidelines that have been placed into a required aspect by the county, and we'll be communicating that out so that it is a stricter quarantine piece, no matter what you decided tonight. But I just need to be clear that there aren't any other motions on the floor.
I don't believe there are. So I will say, though, that these situations seem to, with what the state, the governor, individuals at the legislature, the federal government, and everybody else seems to be changing things on an almost an hourly basis, and that we are all the things that have been decided by various agencies that impact us seem to change quite regularly, and what we are able to make our decisions about today, all those circumstances could be very different in a week also. This is one of the hallmark characteristics of our COVID times right now, where everything changes very, very rapidly. At this point, I do feel strongly that, we have indicated to our families from the very beginning that we were going to be having, that masks were going to be optional. They made their decisions on that as to whether to send their child in person or put them into COA or an online program. And I think that by continuing this, parents still do have the option to send their children to school with masks or not. But I would hope that parents would be cognizant of other children and other families, because when they make a decision not to mask their child, they can be impacting other children's lives, especially if their child happens to be one of those individuals with asymptomatic COVID. And that truly that our entire community needs to work together to keep safe. And I truly hope that parents will consider and strongly consider allowing their children or making their children wear masks to help protect those who are most vulnerable, those who cannot be vaccinated, and really do the right thing. It is a parent's choice, but I certainly would not want another parent making a decision for my child that my child might get COVID because they were exposed to their child who was sick or was sent to school ill or didn't wear a mask when they were sick at school. So I truly hope that everyone in the community takes that responsibility seriously to help protect everyone at school. Mr. Narducci, did you have anything else for your staff or?
Well, I thank you for the staff for the input they put in. I want to address our parents. It's a split group, folks. Let's work with the mitigation strategies that our governing board has given us the authority to do. Let's look at opportunities. I have a lot of parents that have talked to me about virtual opportunities. We're going to model those pieces and get that information to our board. We don't know where this is. We know numbers are lower on our dashboard now, and we know that this can change. I want you to know that we are able to make those changes as needed, and I'm hoping our board will be and listen to those. I know you guys have done that in the past as we see any rates take a turn. The transparency will be there when we have to move sites to stronger mitigation, and we will do so. We did that at Hamilton. That's the best that mitigation strategies can be employed. I would encourage all of our staff that has contacted us or that has responded to the survey, as well as our community who has contacted us, to mask up. If they are needing to mask up for safety, which I will be wearing those in schools when I go to schools as well. Strongly recommend means do what's best for our community and do what's best for your child, but do what's best for your neighbor's child. And I would ask our community to come together, whether we move and change, whether we look at different models and bring them to the board as the rates change. We'll move forward. I don't know if any of this other staff have any other comments, but I know the board made a difficult decision. It's a split decision as well. So it mirrors exactly how our community feels and how our staff feels. All I can say is that we will do the best to get into sites starting tomorrow and to be able to look and see that those mitigation strategies are happening and that they are occurring at every site. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joel, your hand is still up. Did you still have something to comment or say?
Just a quick question. So the item related to the sick leave, will that be on can we get that on the next agenda? So we can discuss it relating to the sick leave for those individuals that have COVID?
Yes, I can talk to Dr. Nance about looking at that being added on to the agenda so that it can be discussed. And she may have a recommendation also to provide.
Okay, thank you.
With that, this meeting then is adjourned. Thank you for attending. Appreciate it. And we'll see you all next week.